Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video may suggest, we're discussing strange things afoot in Thailand's administrative state. I like that term. The first time I heard it that I recall came from Steve Bannon back in the US, especially back in the first Trump administration, where he was talking about the administrative state. I hesitate to use the term deep state. I don't like the current connotations of that. First time I ever heard that term, it referred to Turkey of all places. But actually, I think administrative state is the correct terminology here. And it does have some, for lack of a better term, Leninistic undertones to it as well. And if you sort of research the term administrative state, you'll get some insight into what I'm talking about here. With respect to Thailand, what I'm talking about specifically is there seems to be a lot of machinations occurring now as a result of the moves, if you will, that this current new acting prime minister as well as interior minister seems to be making with regard to the interior ministry. And I think it has broader overtones and undertones insofar as I think there's some sort of move here to, we've already seen undue influence from the World Economic Forum, hence the reason, by the way, for the thumbnail in this video. You know, Mr. Shinawat's daughter, Paetongtarn Shinawat, who's currently the suspended prime minister, and that's the only reason Mr. Phumtham also in the thumbnail. And by the way, I have the communist hammer and sickle in there because, well, quite frankly, he has communist complexion, if you will. And let's cite that real quick. I'm not just saying that apropos of nothing. First of all, from Wikipedia, it's wikipedia.org, quoting directly, Phumtham was a member of the Communist Party of Thailand from 1977 to 1978. Quoting further, this from France24.com, article titled, Big Comrade, former defense chief takes reins as Thai PM, quote, he fled to the jungle where communist guerrillas were plotting uprisings against the nation's military, and recently he has been questioned over his associations. So this is not apropos of nothing that I use that type of verbiage and that I make those connections. The point I'm trying to make is I think there's some sort of move here to do something with regard to the apparatus in charge of dealing with the administration, not only of Thailand's provinces and things, but possibly the elections. And let me get into this. That said, I thought of making this video after reading a recent article from the Bangkok Post, bangkokpost.com. Article is titled, Phumtham Warns Idle Officials. Now, I discussed in a prior video where we were talking, the person that kind of brought this to my attention when reading about their comments was Jatupon Prompan, who in the past tended to have kind of, let's call it populist inclinations, and I think in the past has been somewhat misguided, but he's clearly a nationalist. He cares a lot about, as I am, and for those who are unaware, you know, I think it's important and pertinent to maybe put out there my motivations for making these videos, which is, look, I've been here 17 years. I consider myself an immigrant to Thailand. I became Thai. I love this place. I really do. And one of the things I fell in love with about it is it's a nation. It takes care of itself. It takes care of its own. It cares about its own sovereignty in a time where there seems to be this move against national sovereignty throughout the world by these actors such as the World Economic Forum. And by the way, you know, communists in these weird internationalist positions are not unknown. As we've discussed, Tedros, who currently heads up the WHO, he's pulled the same kind of stuff that we're going to get into here with regard to worldwide public health, like trying to unilaterally claim that the monkeypox epidemic, we'll put a headline up to just show that, but that the monkeypox epidemic was in and of itself a pandemic. I don't even know you could call it an epidemic. It was just an issue, and he tried to unilaterally call it a pandemic, and that all kind of fell flat. But he's a communist. I mean, this guy, you know, this isn't rhetoric, this isn't hyperbole. We're talking about real issues, and the World Economic Forum has all the traits of the old Comintern in many ways. Now, other people have said, hey, you know, no, they really are, you know, sort of right-leaning totalitarians, if you will, and I see their point with the public-private partnerships for its own sake, but I would just call it all totalitarian, and it looks a lot to me like the old kind of Comintern style tactics. and strategies, which I'll get into, and we will cite that Mr. Phumtham's strategic thinking is why he's currently in the role that he's in, which, by the way, was elected by no one. He's not on the slate of possible people to be the prime minister per parliamentary protocols. He's simply in there because the current prime minister is suspended pending a constitutional court ruling that was taken up 9-0 that it should be adjudicated, and in a 7-2 opinion, they all agree that 7-2 they held that she should be suspended pending the adjudication. So again, this is all happening in this kind of limbo. And then meanwhile, we have this person as acting prime minister with communist affiliations who is now undertaking very, for lack of a better term, very Bolshevik-style strategies and tactics to put people in key positions to possibly have an effect on the overall government, on the overall operation of the administrative state here in Thailand. And my question is, toward what end? So going back here again, the article is titled Phumtham Warns Idle Officials. And real quick, before I get into all this is Bangkok Post, bangkokpost.com. We do have a paid news service for folks who like an even deeper dive. And by the way, this is going to be a pretty deep video, but I get into this stuff and how it pertains to expats practically in our paid news service, media@integrity-legal.com. You can email us for information on how to get on the paid news service email list. Also, and I'm going to go ahead and say this now, my better half and I have set up a restaurant here in downtown Bangkok for folks that like breakfast anytime, American-style breakfast. Pancake Palace, we've got bacon, we've got eggs, we've got pancakes as the name implies. We've got all kinds of American-style breakfast. We've also got diner-style food, including hamburgers, cheeseburgers, best buffalo wings, in my opinion, in all of Bangkok. And we've also got things like pork chops and chili bowls. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, go ahead and check us out at Pancake Palace. Link is in the description below to get there. That said, quoting directly from this Bangkok Post article, Interior Minister Phumtham Wechayachai warned idle ministry officials that they face the risk of being transferred and that the reshuffle of positions within the ministry could be finalized this month. My question is, what's the big hurry? Why are we in this hurry to move all these people around? I discussed in another video, he moved another guy out that was set to mandatorily retire in October, and that guy, I believe, was in charge of the administration of all, like he was in charge at the national level of administration of the Department of Provincial Administration, which is basically administering all the provincial apparatus, basically. And that guy was moved aside, even though he was just set to have to retire come October. So all of this is being done in a very hurried manner. And my question is, why? Quoting further, Mr. Phumtham's warning came on Tuesday as speculation of a reshuffle arose ahead of the transfer season. Again, ahead of the transfer season. This is all happening before it normally would. Quoting further, in late September, which is the end of the government fiscal budget year. Again, at the normal time that this is done here. What's the rush? Quoting further, quote, nobody is going to wait until September. I love these sweeping declarations from a guy nobody elected who's sitting in an interim position and, as I'll get into, disregards formal, what I would argue, formal rulings from institutions here regarding its own powers and prerogatives, just makes these sweeping declarations, this is what we're going to do. Quoting further, Mr. Phumtham, who also serves as acting prime minister, told reporters in reference to the repositioning of high-ranking officials within the ministry. Quote, I have ordered all departments to start working because I want to see everything operational by October 1 because there are so many issues at hand. Like what? What specifically needs to light a fire under everybody at a time when the prime minister's tenure itself is being adjudicated by the Constitutional Court and you are only there in an acting capacity as prime minister? Now, okay, you're in as interior minister, but what's the rush? There is a set schedule for doing this stuff. Why the rush? Is it because you're worried that possibly the Constitutional Court is going to adjudicate that no, she's no longer the prime minister and we are going to be set for a new reshuffle at that point, and therefore you're not going to have the time nor the capability to make these changes? Is that the reason? And if so, what's so important that these changes need to be made? Quoting further, Mr. Phumtham said he expects all the changes to be completed by mid-August at the latest. Again, why the rush? What's so important here? The whole country is sitting kind of in a state of transition at the moment, at limbo, if you will, because we're waiting around for this adjudication. You know, to my mind, the prudent thing to do for somebody who is in a temporary position is to just hold down the fort, hold the line, maintain sort of the status quo, get through it, and we figure out what the next legitimate government that has a mandate from the will of the people through the constituencies that elected the parliamentarians. Let's see what that would result in. Not, hey, let's rush around and change all this stuff while we've got a minute here. It smacks of the tactics of the World Economic Forum. This is the kind of stuff they do. The minute they've got, even if it's a tenuous little hold on things, look at the so-called minority government under Trudeau back over there in Canada. One of those World Economic Forum young leaders. Which, by the way, if people ask, well, what's that got to do with Thailand? The currently suspended prime minister is known to have affiliations with the World Economic Forum. So is the former prime minister, Srettha Thavisin. Since we've seen this core coalition party come back into the foreground of parliament, I've seen nothing but moves that are indicative of the World Economic Forum's influence. Most notably the so-called digital wallet, where the country had to go into a massive amount of debt to have all this digital money that could be tracked, traced, turned on and off, and they'd have total control over Thai's financial capabilities and financial transaction capabilities. All of this, this is all indicative of World Economic Forum policy. And my question is, who wanted that in the last election? And meanwhile, who are these people acting only in a temporary capacity trying to push this stuff through? That said, on another note, I think it's worth pointing out, what's the point of the Interior Ministry? What is its function, and why might it be so important that these changes be made so quickly? Quoting from another article in Thai PBS World, that's world.thaipbs.or.th, Phua Thai versus Bumjai Thai, why political titans are at war over the Interior Ministry. Quoting directly, the Interior Ministry serves as the cornerstone of Thailand's administration. Again, that word administration, again, that administrative state, I think it's worth keeping that in the back of your mind. Quoting further, overseeing provincial governors, district chiefs, and local administrative organizations nationwide. It's also worth pointing out that Phua Thai could have operated with a much more secure margin within the coalition, within Parliament, by keeping Bumjai Thai, but they insisted on the Interior Ministry position, which this person is now in and is currently now trying to make all these quick, fast moves during the interim while we're waiting for the Constitutional Court's ruling on the suspension of the Prime Minister, who, by the way, was suspended on allegations of selling out Thailand's sovereignty to a foreign potentate. And there's a phone call, which I've gone over this at length in other videos, where if she didn't intend to do it, it calls into question her competency. And if she did, it calls into question a lot more. But again, all of this, it's just sort of adding up to whose interest is this being done in? Because I ask sincerely, I don't see where the people of Thailand's interest this is being done, or anything in Thailand's interest really, in terms of the sovereign nation of Thailand. Like, to what end is this all being done for? That said, quoting further, so again, this is background on the function of the Interior Ministry. Quoting further, it has long been perceived to wield significant influence over voters and electoral dynamics. Electoral dynamics. Even though the authority to hold elections has passed to the Election Commission, EC. However, the EC still requires assistance from the Interior Ministry. I read that again. However, the EC still requires assistance from the Interior Ministry, which controls a countrywide network of local administrative officials. So this is why the Interior Ministry is important pertaining to elections. Now let's go over here. I talked about this in another video, and it's indicative of, one, Mr. Phumtham's dismissiveness regarding certain of the institutions within Thailand that act as checks and balances regarding the formal powers of different actors within the government. But also now, in the light of this, I've seen this in a different context. his comments regarding a recent ruling from the Council of State. A recent article from the Bangkok Post, bangkokpost.com, article is titled, Deputy Prime Minister Phumtham says he can dissolve House. Says he can dissolve House. Now, let's be clear again here who he is. He's a person he's in an acting capacity for the currently suspended Prime Minister, who is currently suspended pending adjudication of a conversation with the strongman in Cambodia, in which she is alleged, although she's corroborated that the conversation exists, in that conversation she apparently was saying that the field commander of our military here in Thailand is an opponent, and, saying stuff along the lines, oh, you can, we'll give you what you want with regard to the border, Hun Sen. And she's saying things, then there was the whole issue of, hey, let's open the border at this time. And he said, no, I want to open it now. It just seemed like she was just giving way to everything. I've done the videos on that. I've sort of analogized it to the issue of appeasement in past contexts, in a Western context. It's very disturbing and concerning. Again, we have to wait for a final adjudication from the Constitutional Court regarding that. But while we're waiting an adjudication, this acting Prime Minister, who again is not on the slate in the Parliament to be Prime Minister itself, there's a slate of people who can do that. Per the current Constitution and the parliamentary protocols, there's 5 people, it's my understanding, from I believe 4 parties who could. Another one of them, by the way, would come from Phua Thai itself, the core coalition party, which begs the question to me, why not just have this woman step aside, let your third choice come up and become Prime Minister? Is there another reason for that? Is it because due to the fact that she's merely suspended, this guy can act in an acting capacity and you want him there to invoke and to basically implement these strategies, which we'll get to these strategies more here in a minute? That said, quoting directly, Deputy Prime Minister Phumtham Wechayachai dismissed the Council of State's opinion about the acting Prime Minister's power to dissolve the House of Representatives as just one of many legal views. Well, as I've discussed in other videos, it is that institution's function to rule on the powers and limitations of the office of the Prime Minister, which people brought up the fact, well, who do they answer to? They answer to the office of the Prime Minister. But it's somewhat analogous to, I would argue, White House counsel, but it has more of a formal function insofar as it's there to delineate the limitations of the Prime Ministership. And in this case, they weren't necessarily saying the Prime Minister itself or the function of the Prime Minister, or the office of the Prime Minister cannot dissolve the House. They're saying an acting Prime Minister cannot dissolve the House. And I have to say, I would tend to agree with that, because an acting Prime Minister who's not on the slate of people that were put forward to, when the voters went to the polls to vote for their member of Parliament, there was a slate that went out that says, these are the people that we may put up for Prime Minister. This person's name was not on that list or any of those lists for any of those parties. And this person is the one in the position of acting Prime Minister. The Council of State has said an acting Prime Minister cannot dissolve the House. And then this is what the response to that was, quote, Mr. Phumtham, who is currently serving as the acting Prime Minister, said the COS's opinion, that's the Council of State, its opinion given by its Secretary General does not constitute a formal stance. How is it not a formal stance? They're the institution who's designated with making these types of with issuing these types of opinions regarding the functions and limitations of the office. How is that not a formal stance? Quoting further, and is being treated as one of several legal views being considered after Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra was suspended from duty pending a court ruling. Well, it's one of those several legal views, just whatever you think, which, by the way, is classically indicative of World Economic Forum thinking, just whatever we want to do, we'll just do it if we have the power. It's also classic Bolshevik, Marxist, communist thinking. Just do it and move along. It's really, really concerning. That said, I'm getting to another article, quoting directly. Articles from Nation Thailand, that's nationthailand.com. Article is titled, Thaksin Appoints Trusted Aide to Shield Daughter from Armed Forces. So this article is for background, okay? I think it's worth noting how this person got put into the position they were in prior to now being the acting PM, and I think it sheds light on why, okay? And I have to ask the question, has all this been to one degree or another pre-planned? Is this an attempt to subvert the constitutional functions that currently are in place in Thailand in order to gain some outcome that is not constitutionally prescribed? I really am asking that question because it's starting to look like it. Because this is a person in an acting capacity disregarding the opinion of the institution that makes rulings regarding what one can do in the acting capacity of that office, and just says, oh, that's just one opinion. And then meanwhile, you know, we have this person over in the Interior Ministry role who's making all kinds of transfers in the immediately before we would otherwise see these things done anyway. You know, and moving people that have mandatory retirement, you know, a matter of a couple of months before they're set to retire anyway. Why? To what end? And that all must be looked at through the prism of it's within the ministry that would administer elections. And then this person says, well, I can dissolve the House, you know, and I'm not gonna listen to the Council of State telling me that an acting PM can't do that. That's just one opinion. I'm not saying he's not going to listen, but he's saying, well, that's just one opinion. It's not a formal stance. Whatever that means, I don't know how it's not a formal stance when the institution that's designated with rendering opinions regarding the functions of that office is saying something. The Secretary General of that institution says something, and you just say, well, that's just your opinion. How is it not a formal stance? That said, let's quote again, Nation Thailand, nationthailand.com. This is an older article. This is to provide some background here. Again, article is titled "Thaksin Appoints Trusted Aide to Shield Daughter from Armed Forces." You can get into all of this. It's kind of written from the standpoint of there is some kind of, oh, he's going to protect her from that. As we'll get into, it looks to me like it was more no, because she couldn't handle the portfolio. Also, you know, it's my understanding he was supposed to only be in there in this sort of technocratic capacity, and he's not supposed to influence policy or anything. But that said, let's dive in. Quoting directly, Phua Thai Patriarch Thaksin Shinawatra has entrusted his longtime ally, which that's an interesting one, longtime ally. And again, bearing in mind, we'll put this stuff on screen. I did another video on this where Pei Tongtan met with an envoy from the World Economic Forum in the Purple Room at one point. I'm starting to wonder if during his absence from Thailand, if not only was he sitting on his perch in Phnom Penh making things worse for us here in Bangkok in 2010, but he also didn't make friends with people from the World Economic Forum out there. And then, you know, he's got this ally who has known communist connections, which that's a weird, strange bedfellow situation. I thought this guy was supposed to be Mr. Big Businessman Tycoon stuff. That said, quoting further, Phumtham Wachayachai, to play the role of guardian angel for his daughter, Prime Minister Pei Tongtan Shinawatra. Earlier speculation that Pei Tongtan would concurrently hold the post of defense minister was apparently a decoy. Now, first of all, I hate all of this, where it's all of this, oh, we're shadow box and we're going to do this and then we'll do that, because it's trying to trick everybody, most notably the electorate, who just wants to get a government in there that's at least somewhat responsive to their wants and needs and isn't going to be in there doing everything to the benefit of just a few people, which is kind of what ends up happening in communist regimes and totalitarian regimes in general. That said, quoting further, with Thaksin well aware his daughter is too inexperienced to be defense minister, but yet let's make her prime minister so she can run the whole country. You know, so this whole thing, I think that's really telling. Because the way that article was initially spun, if you read it, is like, oh, she needs to worry about the armed forces. No, her own dad knew that she's not really competent enough for that job to begin with, which I think was borne out at the very least in her phone call with Hun Sen. Quoting further, Phumtham's experience as a political and military strategist dates back to the 70s. I want to read that again. Phumtham's experience as a political and military strategist dates back to the 1970s when he joined the Communist Party of Thailand and was known as Comrade Yai, Big Comrade. So let me get this straight. He was brought in for his strategic thinking, and he gained his strategic thinking when he was with the communists as a guerrilla, as I pointed out in the prior article from France 24, as a guerrilla operating against the interests here in Thailand. I mean, he was a guerrilla, okay? And now we're seeing these types of strategic plays within the administrative state of the Interior Ministry, which has the authority to help administer elections here in Thailand, and this same person in his capacity as acting PM is disregarding the Council of State's opinion that he doesn't have the authority to dissolve the House and thereby call new elections. This person who, and I quote, his experience as a political and military strategist dates back to the 70s when he joined the Communist Party of Thailand and was known as Comrade Yai. That person, who, again, and I quote France 24, fled to the jungle where communist guerrillas were plotting uprisings against the nation's military and recently has been questioned over his associations. That person. Quoting further, while Phumtham's official role as defense minister is crucial, which, by the way, it's my understanding we still don't have a defense minister right now, quoting further, his core duty is to help the inexperienced PM run the country, run the economy. So on top of that, we brought in a communist, a clearly failed economic ideology. I mean, say whatever you will about the rest of it. You know, we know the USSR didn't work, you know, and then the Chinese set under Deng Xiaoping, what was that, where they opened the window and some flies would come in? You know, they even had to bring in capitalism because, you know, communism didn't work. So that guy's going to be on the team to look over the economy. And meanwhile, going back to this, quoting again, help the inexperienced PM run the economy. So she can't run the economy either. She can't run the defense ministry. But let's put her in charge of the whole country as prime minister. Which, again, we've seen how this bore out. You know, the proof is now in the pudding. She got on the phone with a bordering sovereign country, and it was a disaster. Let's just call it that. Okay? That said, you know, this is his ally. I thought he was a businessman. That's how he's always been touted, a businessman. But his ally is this, again, communist military strategist, dates back to the 1970s when he joined the Communist Party of Thailand and was known as Comrade Yai. That's the ally of this great businessman? Quoting further, as a result, Phumtham will get help in overseeing the military from Deputy Defense Minister General Natapon Nakpanit of the United Thai Nation Party, but since Natapon is not a Phua Thai member, Thaksin cannot trust the general 100%. You know, loyalty to this party thing over country and this whole obsession with party loyalty, it sounds an awful lot like the stuff seen in Russia from, what, 1917 to 1991? This is creepy. This is very creepy stuff. It's being done in a very subversive manner. It's being done in such a way that it's subtle. Outsiders who don't know the inner workings of Thailand, if a change is to happen, like the Constitutional Court says, hey, and I'm not saying it's a foregone conclusion, it's on them to adjudicate that, but if they were to say, hey, her conduct was not appropriate, she is going to be dismissed in her role as prime minister, you know, what happens? What happens if he dissolves the House, even though he doesn't particularly have the power to do that, per the Council of State's own opinion? I mean, what happens there? Is there going to be some big move here being made? Or could we just have him pick the next Phua Thai guy? Or have Parliament get back together and pick another person that's not some acting person that has prior Communist Party leanings and was a strategist and a guerrilla for them? You know, I have serious, if you can't tell, I have serious concerns about all of this. That said, it remains to be seen how all this is going to play out, so we'll certainly be keeping you updated on this channel as the situation evolves.